Welcome to the deep dive. You sent us your source, and we're ready to get into it.
Let's do it.
Today, we're taking a look at a sermon titled, The Best Is Yet to Come, the inspiration. It's the biblical book of Haggai, specifically chapter 2, verses 1 through 9.
Okay.
Our source is a pasted text containing excerpts from this very sermon. You're here for, that quick but thorough understanding, those aha moments that connect the dots without being overwhelming. And that's exactly what we're aiming for.
Sounds good. Yeah. Getting those key insights without wading through hours of material.
Exactly. This sermon, originally delivered to a congregation, brings together ancient history and a really interesting take on our expectations in life. So let's see what we can unpack.
Absolutely. Our goal to give you a clear grasp of the sermon's central argument and explore how it might speak to us today, just as it did to its original audience. The speaker starts by really setting the scene, doesn't he? It feels like we're right there.
It does. He begins with these opening remarks that really place us in that moment, that church service. He gives honor to God, acknowledges the senior pastor, John K. Jenkins Sr., is away, sends him well wishes.
Right.
Recognizes the First Lady, his brother Josh Jenkins, the work they're doing. There is even a playful moment where he calls himself the oldest Jenkins kid.
Yeah, that adds a nice touch.
Which adds a very human touch, yeah. He then addresses the elders, leaders, the whole First Baptist family, visitors. It's a vivid snapshot of a church gathering. And then he guides everyone to the core of his message, the book of Haggai.
And this is where the foundational scripture comes in. As the speaker points out, Haggai is it's a concise but incredibly impactful prophetic book in the Old Testament. This sermon focuses specifically on Haggai chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. Okay,
so let's dig into this passage a bit. The speaker summarizes it by explaining that God is speaking through the prophet Haggai to three key groups: Zerubbabel, the governor, Joshua, the high priest, and the remnant of the people, basically, those who had returned from exile. Right, the ones who came back.
And God asks them a really thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
How does this newly built temple they're working on stack up against the memory of its former glory, Solomon's temple? You can imagine the original must have been breathtaking.
Precisely. Solomon's temple was, a symbol of immense wealth and power. This new temple, built by a much smaller group with, limited resources, likely paled in comparison. But the crucial point here is that God isn't encouraging them to just wallow in that comparison.
Not at all, no. Instead, God urges them to be strong and to keep working on the temple, reassuring them with the powerful words, "For I am with you."
Yeah.
He even connects this back to the fundamental promise he made when he delivered them from slavery in Egypt, reminding them of his consistent faithfulness throughout their history.
And then comes that really central promise, the one that gives the sermon its title. God declares that he will once again shake not just the earth, but the heavens, the sea, the dry land. And this shaking will have a remarkable consequence. The treasures of all nations will come, and he will fill this house with glory. Wow.
He even states definitively, "The silver and the gold belong to me." And of course, the key verse for our discussion is that the glory of this latter house will be greater than that of the former.
Greater than Solomon's.
That's the promise. And in that place, God will grant peace. It's a powerful message of future hope, suggesting that what's to come will surpass even the grandest memories of the past.
Which brings us directly to the heart of the sermon. The best is yet to come. The speaker clearly establishes this as the driving theme, drawing it directly, undeniably, from that encouraging promise in Haggai.
But he doesn't just leave it as a hopeful saying, right? He then makes a really interesting turn by introducing a contemporary perspective, citing a 2016 social science study with a rather lengthy title, "The Social Contingency of Momentary Subjective Well-Being."
Right, it's quite a mouthful.
Yeah. Now, this study, as he interprets it, arrived at a rather surprising conclusion about the relationship between happiness and our expectations.
Right. As the speaker explains, this study basically suggested that the most straightforward path to happiness is to actually lower or even get rid of your expectations altogether. The logic being that if you don't expect much, you're less likely to be disappointed, and therefore you'll experience more moments of subjective well-being. It's a pretty low-bar approach to happiness, wouldn't you say?
It certainly presents a different strategy for navigating life.
Yeah.
And the speaker in the sermon offers a direct and quite compelling counter-argument. He proposes that the issue isn't with having expectations in general, but with having misplaced expectations. That's a really critical distinction he draws.
Yeah, that makes you think, where do we usually put our hopes?
Absolutely. He goes on to elaborate on why placing our deepest expectations on certain things might inevitably lead to disappointment. He points out the inherent flaws and limitations of people,
Oh, yeah.
the often harsh realities of the world, and even our own struggles to live up to our own ideals.
He uses such relatable examples to drive this point home. He reminds us that people are, well, people. They're imperfect, they can be unreliable, their intentions might waver.
We've all been there.
Totally. Then he looks at the world itself, acknowledging its brokenness and the unpredictable nature of life. And then, in a way that probably resonates with many listeners, he talks about how often we fall short of our own goals, those New Year's resolutions for the gym,
Guilty.
those promises to eat healthier, to set better boundaries in relationships, even to be more consistent in our faith practices. We've all been there.
Those examples really hit home, don't they? It makes you think about how often we invest our emotional energy and hopes in things that are ultimately outside of our control or, inherently flawed.
So, if we can't relatedly place our expectations on people, the world, or even ourselves, where does the speaker suggest we should focus them?
The answer, according to the sermon, is unequivocally on God. The speaker argues that God possesses the unique ability not only to meet our expectations, but to far exceed them, to do exceeding abundantly above all that you can ask or think. It's a significant shift in where we place our trust and our hopes.
This really reframes the idea of expectation, doesn't it? Instead of aiming low to avoid disappointment, he's suggesting we aim high, but direct that aim towards something truly capable and reliable.
Exactly. He calls for high and holy expectations, directed at God's power and promises, contrasting that with the ultimately limited offerings of the world around us.
And he directly ties this back to the message of Haggai. He explains that God's promise to be with them and the grand promises of future glory provide that solid foundation for a confident expectation of a better future.
Right. It's not just wishful thinking. It's anchored in faith in God's character and the consistency of His Word. This really gets to the core of wanting thorough knowledge. It's not just about feeling optimistic, but understanding the basis for that optimism.
Exactly. And building on this foundation of God's presence and these promises, the speaker then issues a really encouraging call to action. He urges the congregation, and by extension, us to dream again, to think again, to try again.
I like that.
He's saying, don't let past setbacks or disappointments define what you believe is possible in the future. Lift your sights and place your trust in a God who can do more than you can imagine.
He then provides some crucial context by explaining the specific historical situation surrounding the book of Haggai. He reminds everyone that these words were originally spoken to a people who had just returned from a long and difficult exile in Babylon.
Right, not exactly easy times.
No, they were in the very challenging process of rebuilding their national identity in Jerusalem and were working to reconstruct the temple, a project that had stalled for about 14 years after the initial foundation was laid.
14 years. Wow, that historical backdrop really adds weight to the message, doesn't it? They weren't in a comfortable or easy situation. They faced opposition from surrounding peoples and had their own internal struggles, discouragement.
Understandably. As a result, many had prioritized their own immediate needs, focusing on building their own homes before fully dedicating themselves to rebuilding God's house. You can see why, but
Yeah, survival mode, maybe.
perhaps. And this is where the speaker draws a really relevant parallel for today's listener. He points out that God, through Haggai, was essentially saying that their priorities were out of order. It wasn't about getting your own life completely sorted before you engage with your faith or your community.
Ah, okay.
Instead, it was about prioritizing God's house and trusting that He would, in turn, take care of their needs. He connects this to those who might be feeling financially strained or facing other challenges, thinking, I need to reach a certain level of stability before I can actively serve or participate.
Before I can give back. Yeah, I get that.
The central idea here is the interconnectedness of our actions of faith and God's provision. The speaker emphasizes that actively engaging in serving God, in building up the house of God, however that looks in our lives, cultivates a holy expectation for a better future. He used that really striking phrase, when you start building again, I'll start blessing again.
When you start building again, I'll start blessing again. It suggests a dynamic partnership where our acts of faith kind of open the door for God's blessings.
Exactly. Now, to cultivate this kind of hopeful expectation, The speaker outlines a three-part approach, and the first part is all about managing the past. He takes us back to Haggai 2.13, where God prompts the people to remember Solomon's temple and compare it to the current, much less impressive structure they were building.
It's important to understand the emotional context here. For those who had seen Solomon's temple in its glory, this new one must have felt like a major letdown.
Oh, definitely. It probably looks small and insignificant in comparison. So God is directly addressing their potential disappointment and the temptation to dwell on what they felt they had lost.
Right, getting stuck looking backward.
Exactly. And the speaker in the sermon explains that constantly looking back with regret, always comparing the present unfavorably to a romanticized past, actively hinders our ability to have expectation for the future. And then he delivers that really powerful and memorable line. If God wanted your past to be your future, he wouldn't have let it become your past.
Ooh. That really sticks with you, doesn't it?
It does. He goes on to explain how nostalgia, while it can be pleasant, can also be a trap, keeping us anchored to old seasons and preventing us from fully embracing new opportunities and blessings that God might have in store.
And then he uses that great analogy, the MTV dating show. What was it? Where someone could just say, next.
Yes, the next button. It's such a vivid illustration. He uses it to say that sometimes we need to be willing to let go of past experiences, even good ones, because God has something even better on the bus for us, something coming in the future.
Okay, I see.
The past, he clarifies, shouldn't be our blueprint for the future, but rather a record, a testimony to God's faithfulness in our lives.
Right. Learn from it, don't live in it. And he even anchors this in the specific date mentioned in Haggai, the 21st day of the 7th month. He explains that this was the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles.
Okay, yeah.
Now, for someone who might not be familiar, the Jewish people had 3 major annual feasts, each with a specific focus. Passover celebrated their freedom from slavery in Egypt.
Right, liberation.
First Fruits celebrated the initial blessings of the harvest in the Promised Land. And then there's Tabernacles.
And Tabernacles was all about remembering their journey through the wilderness after they left Egypt. Those 40 years of living in temporary shelters, basically.
Okay.
The speaker emphasizes that even though it was a time of hardship, God consistently provided for them manna to eat, quail, water from a rock, his constant protection. So the point he's making is that actively remembering God's past faithfulness, his acts of deliverance and provision, that's what builds our confidence and strengthens our expectation for the future.
So looking back productively.
Exactly. He even shares some personal reflections and quotes familiar verses like Psalm 23.4, "Yea, though I walk through the valley," to really drive this home.
Okay, so if managing the past through remembering God's faithfulness is the first step, the second, according to the speaker, is all about maximizing the present.
Right.
He argues that when we truly see our past as a demonstration of God's reliability, it empowers us to view the present as an opportunity to actively demonstrate our own faith, to be strong and work, just as Haggai encouraged.
And he makes a really important distinction between those two commands. Be strong and work. He explains that be strong is about our inner state, cultivating an attitude of fortitude, joy, positivity, regardless of circumstances.
Attitude.
Yeah, the attitude. And work is the outward action, the practical steps we take. He points out that you can be busy on the outside, but filled with negativity on the inside.
Oh yeah, we've all seen that. Or been that.
Right, emphasizing that both inner strength and outward effort are necessary.
And then he brings in the idea of the remnant in Haggai, that relatively small group of people who actually returned from exile to rebuild. He highlights the fact that it was a daunting task with seemingly limited resources and a small workforce.
Very small compared to who left originally.
And he uses really relatable examples of how frustrating it can be when you feel like you're carrying a heavy load and others aren't pulling their weight, whether it's in family responsibilities, group projects, or the challenges of single parenthood.
Exactly. And the core message here is to stop being discouraged or frustrated by those who aren't there or aren't helping as much as you'd like. Instead, the focus should be on having faith in the one who is there, God himself. The powerful promise, "I am with you," is reiterated.
That's huge.
Offering comfort and strength.
Yes, that constant reassurance that God will never abandon them, that he is always present, is so central. The speaker encourages persistent effort even when the support from others feels lacking. Keep going.
Which naturally leads to the final piece of cultivating this holy expectation. Moving on to promise. The speaker directs our attention to God's powerful declaration in Haggai to shake the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the dry ground.
Sounds dramatic.
It does, with the ultimate purpose of bringing the treasures of all nations to this place.
He acknowledges the very real practical challenge that the returned exiles faced, right? They needed significant resources to rebuild the temple.
Huge resource.
Resources they simply didn't have in the same way that someone like King Solomon did. They lacked the money, the political power, the widespread influence, maybe even a particularly supportive Persian king at that exact moment. It's that feeling of having a big vision but not seeing the earthly means to achieve it.
Precisely. But the speaker emphasizes that God's declaration of shaking things is a poetic picture of the sovereign power of God. It's a reminder to shift our focus from our limited earthly circumstances to the limitless capacity of who God is.
Okay.
And he reiterates that fundamental truth: the silver and the gold belong to me.
And that's not just a statement of ownership, is it? It carries the implication of God's ability to direct and redistribute those resources according to his will.
Exactly.
And for the benefit of his people. The speaker suggests that God can even influence the hearts of those who might not naturally be inclined to help.
He then points to the historical fulfillment of this very promise in the book of Ezra, specifically chapter 6, where the Persian king actually instructs neighboring nations to provide the Jewish people with everything they needed to complete the temple.
Wow, so it actually happened.
It actually happened. It's a concrete example from their history of God's provision in action.
So the takeaway is that if we, as listeners, continue to work faithfully and do what we are called to do, God will step in and provide in ways that we ourselves cannot orchestrate.
That's the core message.
The speaker concludes this section with a really encouraging thought. It's on the way. Whatever we might need, whatever resources are required, God is able to redistribute and bring those blessings into our lives.
It's a message of profound trust. The sermon then transitions into a direct call to action within the context of the church service. The speaker encourages everyone present to actively reclaim their sense of hopeful expectation, to praise God with anticipation for what he will do.
Not just after he does it.
Right. Praise and expectation. And to go out and share the message that the best is yet to come. There's a real sense of communal hope and expectant praise being fostered.
You can feel that energy. And then in closing, he extends an invitation, offering an opportunity for those who feel a need for Jesus and forgiveness to come forward. He connects this act of faith with the idea of truly experiencing their best by letting go of the burdens of the past and entering into a new relationship with Christ.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close for you, our listener, the core message that emerges from this sermon is this powerful and practical framework for cultivating genuine hope. It involves intentionally managing our perspective on the past by remembering God's faithfulness.
Step 1.
Actively engaging in the present with both inner strength and outward effort.
Step 2.
And confidently looking towards the future, grounded in God's promises and his provision. Step 3. It's fundamentally about shifting our reliance from the often unreliable aspects of the world to a steadfast trust in something greater.
And that brings us to a couple of questions for you to reflect on. In what specific area of your life might you be holding on to past disappointments or regrets in a way that's hindering your ability to have hopeful expectations for the future?
Good question.
And where might you need to apply more diligence and effort in the present, fueled by a stronger faith and a positive outcome? You know, the be strong and work part.
Ultimately, regardless of your personal history or the challenges you might be currently facing, this sermon offers a compelling perspective. That by focusing our hope beyond the immediate, beyond the limitations of people and circumstances, there is a very real possibility that the best is yet to come.
So we encourage you to continue your own deep dive into these ideas. Consider how they resonate with your own life and the power that can come from intentionally managing your past, maximizing your present, and moving forward with faith-filled expectation. Thanks for joining us for this exploration.
Yeah, thanks everyone.